Today we are talking about Rare's biggest mistake that didn't happen, thankfully. We're also going to talk about some other things that have been found out lately that could be interesting, but that's going to be a secondary point. Now obviously when we're talking about the biggest mistake, there's going to be a lot of talk about not enough content in the game, too high of a price tag for the game at release point, and all that kind of stuff. We've heard it 1,000 times now. And I don't disagree. I do believe that some of these things were really big mistakes. I do believe that the game does not have enough content to justify its price tag, and while I am enjoying it, I do think that most of the complaints are very valid. But those are the mistakes that happened, and mentioning them 1,000 times is not going to make them any better. It's just something that will have to be worked on over time. This mistake, though, did not happen. And the reason it did not happen was the community, and that is a great thing to see in my opinion. Rare announced that they would like to introduce a death tax to the game. This would only affect PvE, not PvP, so when other pirates attack, this wouldn't come into play. But if you were killed or died by your own fault, if you, for example, died by falling off a cliff, by shooting yourself into a wall or anything like that, then if you get on the Ferry of the Damned, you'd have to pay a fee to the ferryman to come back to life. There wasn't any information on how much this death tax was going to be, so it could have been anything from a really small sum to a larger amount. There was also no mention of what would happen if you don't have any gold at that point, if you would go into negative or if you would stay at 0 or whatever. Now, death tax in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing in every game. In certain games it just makes a lot of sense. It can make the grind longer, but it can also be logical. In World of Warcraft, you get punished for playing too recklessly and your items lose some sort of durability, which you have to repair then. And that will cost you gold, so in that sense you have a death tax, which makes you not want to die too often. Generally, most games shouldn't reward you for dying in general, as it is something that is not what you want to aim for in the game. But as so often, context matters. And context matters here especially as we're talking about a game that has much more of a sandbox and a fun character. Sea of Thieves doesn't aim to take itself too seriously, and it doesn't really have that very competitive edge to it. Sure, there are some people trying to be the first pirate legend, and there are some more PvP-oriented players that will try to defeat the enemy players. But that doesn't take away from the game in general being very lighthearted and very much about having fun with your friends. And that is where a death tax simply doesn't fit in. Because a lot of the fun in Sea of Thieves is actually from trying those stupid risky things, like seeing how far you can shoot yourself with a cannon and land at a perfect spot, or trying to jump off a cliff and see if you can survive it and maybe ambush an enemy that's down underneath or something like that. Anything that's in some way considered crazy and funny is something that you want to do in Sea of Thieves, and most players enjoy that very much about the game. If, however, that is taken away from you, then the game all of a sudden becomes a lot more serious. You would be less willing to take risks because you don't want to sacrifice your hard-earned gold just for having that one funny move that worked out once. You'd be spending that extra time swimming to the island instead of firing yourself over with a cannon. And especially skeleton forts would be dramatically less rewarding for many players. Sure, there are really good players that can go through skeleton forts without dying once, but most players I've seen actually die a few times while grinding their way through it. Especially solo players have it hard enough clearing a skeleton fort on their own if they want to go for that. And if they then end up having to pay a massive fee every time they try to clear it because for every death they get heavily punished, you can imagine how many solo players would actually try and approach a skeleton fort in the first place. So not only does it take the fun away for some players, but it also makes rewarding tasks more risky in a way that shouldn't necessarily be more risky, that isn't really something that we should be aiming for. But it doesn't stop there. There's another issue that comes with taking away the gold of players. And that is that in Sea of Thieves, especially in regards to the relatively limited content we have right now, all of the content that you can get is achieved through gold. All of the cosmetics, which are basically a progression, is something that you can only reach through gold. There are the reputations with the different factions, which are another thing that you wouldn't lose, but if you want to look different, you need to pay gold for it. If you take away this currency, you're basically taking away one part of the main progression. It is not like taking away gold in another game. In another game, what you would be taking away in the same place would be experience, because the only progression that we have are cosmetics. So you would punish a player by not only taking away their main currency, but their progression in the game a little bit every time they die. This has been done in the past. I'm not saying this is something that could never be done. In the more hardcore MMOs way back in the day, this was pretty much standard. And it's not something that's completely out of this world, but in nowadays games, it's not something that is very preferred and that many people like. So really, it's not what most of the community would want, especially in a lighthearted game. And because of these reasons, people were not happy with this proposed change. There was an outrage going, especially through Reddit, against these death taxes. I would imagine that on the forums it wasn't much different, and people generally voiced their unhappiness with this change. And here's the nice thing, Rare listened. In their recent patch notes for the patch 1.01, which was primarily a patch to fix a lot of the technical issues that the game had and reduce various problems that were there before, there was a note regarding the death cost. Thank you all for your feedback on our previously discussed coming update. Death cost. Due to your passionate comments, we have decided to not move forward with this feature. Thanks for the honest feedback and discussion on this. When a developer writes passionate, I always get the feeling that there's a subtle note of some of these comments weren't all that nice, but oh well, that just happens. That's just how many of the communities like to raise their voices and make themselves be heard. But I do think it's very, very good that Rare listened here, because that shows that Rare is generally paying attention to the climate of how things are and what people would like to see changed, also reflected in a lot of the technical changes that they did in this patch. And that is something that I think is promising for future updates. Again, coming back to the point of relatively low amounts of content in the game, it is one thing to not have content, but it's another thing to be able to help shape that content. If Rare listens as much to players as they do here on other changes as well, then we can expect a game that over time will get a lot of features that the community wants, can get behind, or even proposes themselves. This may or may not be part of the reason why they haven't released a full roadmap yet. I could imagine that they are definitely under pressure right now, knowing that they will have to release content rather quickly. But at the same time, it's hard to make a roadmap if you're gonna take in that much feedback from your players to hear what they want to see in the game at some point. So as much as I like to hear more, I can understand them possibly holding back on this information a little bit for that very reason. There is another topic regarding Sea of Thieves that we can talk about today though, and that is that we actually have the first pirate legend in the game. A streamer managed to achieve that by basically switching from his friends groups to his friends groups. So his friends would go on a quest or on a skeleton fort or whatever and pick up the loot, go back to an outpost, and then have this player join them in the game. That way he would basically get the rewards immediately by them handing in all the rewards, and then he would leave their game again and join the next players, and that way grind up in the ranks of all the factions very, very quickly. Now, you can debate if you like this method of grinding up or not. It is, I guess, in a way a bit cheating, but it's more like cheating the system than cheating other players. I'm personally very neutral towards it. I don't really approve of it, and I don't really think it's the way you should be achieving that. At the same time, I'm not completely upset about it. But the interesting thing is that through that, we kind of know what happens when you get the status of the pirate legend. And so far, that's unfortunately not that much. There is a custom costume, basically some extra cosmetics that you can unlock. There is a quest chain, and apparently there are some harder skeletons. But that's almost about it. We know that there will be more content that you can unlock in the future, when there's basically the big upgrade for the pirate legend in 3 months. But that isn't really there yet, and you don't really get anything of those new parts yet. They will come then, and I think for most players this will be less of a problem than it's painted as at the moment, as most people will simply not be pirate legends in 3 months. But for those who really went for that early grind, it's maybe not quite as rewarding, quite as cool as they were expected to be, even though there are some cool features tied to the pirate legend that you can do and how you get there, that I don't really want to go into too much detail about because I don't want to spoil it. But at the same time, I can tell you there are some things that look really cool, that probably feel really cool when you do them for the first time, and all that kind of stuff that will give you really the vibe of being different from the rest of the players without actually having the whole thing attached to it of having to have better gear or something. Just things that you can do that you couldn't do before. I think that's pretty cool. And if that is expanded upon later on, that could be great. And with that, thank you guys for watching. If you're new to the channel, I have made quite a few Sea of Thieves videos at this point, and I will continue to do so along with my Smite videos. So if you want to check those out, I have a combat guide with 15 combat tricks, how to master combat. I have a video on the upcoming features for Sea of Thieves, and I have a little montage of the funny moments that I had with my friends playing the game. So the links will be around here, you can click them as well. Feel free to check that stuff out. Other than that, I hope this was interesting and informative. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and ring the bell, it really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out. And as I don't have an outro at the moment, I would usually leave you with my dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, but we are playing Sea of Thieves, so we're doing a Sea of Thieves outro.